Are we missing one? Good morning, bonjour. My name is Chantal Aubertin and I'm Minister Lametti's press secretary. Je suis l'attachée de presse du ministre Lametti. Thank you for joining us today for this important announcement. I acknowledge with gratitude that we are starting this press conference from the traditional territory of the Algonquin peoples. Given that so much of what we do is now taking place virtually, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional territories of which you may be. For those in the room, I would like to let you know that Sasha Gordon, a counselor from the Wabano Center for Aboriginal Health, is available to support residential school survivors who are present today. She will be in the Saint Laurent room downstairs. Justice officials can accompany you if you're needed at any time during this announcement. Before we get started, I would like to turn to Elder Fred McGregor for his opening prayer.
Yes, good morning, everyone. It's nice to be here and was invited to come over. At first, I wasn't sure what the event was, but I got the briefing. And the interesting part of all of this is we just had our community gathering. And in our community gathering, our powwow, we had overwhelming numbers. But we also had an overwhelming number of survivors and residential school. And we didn't know how to handle it in the sense that what to do after a 2.5 year hiatus of not gathering. But knowing all that's happened with the residential school and finding of the burials. One of the things that we did is we went to our traditions and our understandings and looking around to all our community members and all our nations and visitors. We went back to the original, the way we handled the protocols, etc. So I would just like to say for here, Kwe, Sego, Wache, Danse, Nani Bourgeois. These are the territorial areas and neighbors. But I would also like to give greetings to all the visitors and all the First Nations that are here in this room for this press conference announcement. This is something that is very serious and is part of the Canadian legacy. The Anishinaabe children that didn't make it home and that are still out there, this is serious. But it's also at the same time, this is part of the Canadian legacy and history that Canada is now coming to understand. I am going to give you a quick acknowledgement. And what I will do is I will do it in the original language and I'll quickly paraphrase. For the translators, I'll try to slow down. So if I could have everyone in the audience here stand up, please, I would appreciate it. This is, I think, one of many gatherings that we're now just doing in person, so we're all a little apprehensive. Kakanaguch CB Saigaran, Nuaguch Tangimigach, King Gaiton Ojamaguch, Mishki, Sanai Mashkiki, Kakanaguch, Metiguk, Kenuaguch, King Nib, Naking Gaito, and Ocean Nuaguch Migach. Nuaguch on Migach on Jane, a Gitsim Nanik. Naguk Miss Nanik, Mishom Sananik. Nuin good tang shimi gets when Jay Tewe gonna shit your quagan. Tang shimi gets on Jay Kanamagos when on Jay Tewe gonna shit your quagan. Nuin good chimi gwetch. Chimi gwetch give it dog questioning in dog Schnanik. The mom do same and mom way good in the weed in the Schnabe gosh margach. Kaishin Kai de Gay Mekanaka key. Nuin good King guy chicken, gigi chichige. Miguet on Jay, the get seem non mashum sanan, the gonsh, margach. We can't on our keen guy chicken on Jay Kanama going. On Shamagut Shay, the Mam Jigos, Minna and I could say, and on Jay Abano G shuck. Miguet, he nagji Abano G shuck. God in this what comes she in this what I should say. Abano G shuck. Kind of boy, guy in Kashin Kade residential command nani. I quave a guy in a Gazajic. Kind of saw on a quave, a cave, you know, I should say Abanoji Shakain, kind of saw on a residential command nani. Ain't all because we don't question on the Nizanton on the Dakim non, the Nagjaton on the Dakim non, Mum Wigage and the Witch Mimadzi young ocean mortgage. The way in a good chimiga chonche non gum, Gi nagji, Gaya Condinisi, or Gaya Abnoji shuk. Aji Maji Kandana, walking Kajichige, or Jonji and Abnoji Shnanik. In Abigus, Chimishkauzi, Anchi Kandana, Kajichige, watching K go and I got all the moment, gets to be Dokok, Abnoji shuk. No, you don't get Chimigwetch. This is the thanks for all of today, for the breath that has been given to me and to all of us, and for all that has been created for the flora and the fauna, for all that it is created and that is put here and the stuff that we do not know of. But we do acknowledge for the gifts that have been given. The gifts from our elders and our grandparents. And for the drum and for the pipe and for the teachings that go with that. We as First Nations still love and care for our lands. Now we still continue, but we still continue to share for the drum and for the pipe. When we gather here today, we gather to acknowledge that, but most important for the children that, and the murdered and missing women, but especially for the children that were taken in the residential school, for the ones that are buried and for the ones that were abused and for the ones that are actually murdered. Give us that strength so that we know what happened to them and that we as people here at all the colors understand the Canadian legacy of what this means. And we understand how it impacts us. There's going to be a while that this is going to continue. There is one in the Jewish nation that says never again. One of the things that still continues when we look around the world. So today, I hope that we will understand better and things will be addressed that need to be addressed for our children. There's a word, our children. You were responsible for our children. So now we have to address all of this together, and we're in this together because each and every one of you have children. We know what happened in this pandemic. You hug your children and you love them because this pandemic was not racist. pandemic didn't care, and it got some of us. The other one was intentional. Let's say, Chong Chimigwech.
Thank you to Elder McGregor for starting us off in a good way. Today I have with me the Honourable David Lametti, Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, the Honourable Marc Miller, Minister of Crown-Indigenous Relations, Kimberly Murray, Independent Special Interlocutor for Missing Children in unmarked graves and burial sites associated with Indian residential schools, and you just heard from Elder Fred McGregor. By video, we have Cookbee Rosanne Casimir and Chief Cadmus Delorme. We'll have the opportunity to hear short opening remarks from each of our guests, then we'll go to a QA. Before we get started, I want to cover off a few housekeeping details. As always, please turn off your camera and keep your mic on mute when not speaking if you're dialing in. Je cède maintenant la parole to Minister Marc Miller, who will be saying a few words. Over to you, Minister Miller.
Kwekwe ulukut, watkwanuradu, tanse, hello, bonjour. We're gathered here today in Ottawa on the traditional and unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. First, I want to thank Elder Fred McGregor for the opening words and getting us off in a good way. I want to take a quick moment to acknowledge all the dignitaries that are here today, President Obed, President Caron, Chief Dylan White Duck, thank you for your welcome. Grand Chief Victor Bonspiel, Grand Chief Mark Hill, survivors gathered today. I see Wendy Johnson as well. It's nice to see all of you as well as the parliamentary secretaries and MPs that have gathered here today for this important announcement and important day in our history. It's been just over 1 year since the Tk'emlúps to Secwépemc announced their initial findings, and that news remains as difficult and horrific today as when it was first announced. And since then, many communities across the country have come forward with other possible findings, most recently Saging First Nation, and late yesterday Pine Creek First Nation. And unfortunately, we know that this is just the tip of the iceberg. Au cours de la dernière année, les Canadiens ont commencé à prendre conscience de la profondeur et de l'ampleur de ces impacts en découvrant bien au-delà d'une centaine d'années de colonisation, mais bien un demi-millénaire. Cette annonce qui a eu lieu pendant le mois national de l'histoire de l'histoire autochtone nous donne l'occasion de poursuivre sur cette lancée en faisant connaître la vérité et les voix des peuples autochtones qui ont trop longtemps été réduites au silence. For too long, you've been reduced to silence. And National History Month is an important time to mark this occasion because hopefully it will help in some measure survivors, their families, those suffering from intergenerational traumas, and communities, nations address the ongoing legacy of residential schools, a very true, a very horrific part of our history as a country with the ongoing impacts that it has today. And to the survivors and families, it's important that you hear this. We believe you, Canada believes you, and we honor those that are courageously speaking up, some for the first time, and we honor and respect those who continue to suffer in silence to this day. We're also committed as a government to providing ongoing support as communities lead the work to identify, preserve, and protect the final resting places of their loved ones. In parallel, today is an important moment. The independent special prosecutor will help families, survivors undertake the incredible work that they need to do in a respectful and culturally appropriate way while honoring the wish of survivors, community families, and members. L'interlocuteur spécial ouvrira la porte à d'importants changements systémiques, institutionnels et juridiques pour protéger et préserver les sites de sépulture non marqués. And this will be a point person, connecting communities to government, facilitating conversations, building trust, holding us to account. This is a process we know will take time, but building that trust is critical to advancing our government's commitment to reconciliation and, importantly, healing. I look forward to working with this individual, who will be announced momentarily by Minister Lametti, and Indigenous leadership and communities to continue building strong partnerships with Indigenous peoples. On that note, I'd like to welcome someone who's been an incredible leader for her community through this difficult time, and nationally, Kimberly Casimir. Miigwech, Nakumik, Marcy, thank you, merci.
Go ahead, Kupi.
Thank you. Wai to Kupi Rosanne. Very honored to be here today and to be participating in this here announcement along with the ministers. I wanted to thank for starting us off in a good way with the opening prayer and giving us the much needed grounding. It is so important, especially how sensitive this has been, and acknowledge the leadership as well that are in attendance, the survivors, the intergenerational survivors. And I'm honored to be speaking and sharing with you today from the direct ancestral lands of the Secwépemc and within the Secwépemc Nation. And I also wanted to, acknowledge Pine Creek, Manitoba as well with the recent findings, and honored to be here with Chief Cadmus Delorme as well. So what I wanted to share is, on behalf of our community, the Cowessess First Nation, we are very pleased to learn of the appointment and the mandates that will be, brought forth from the position of the special interlocutor. We learned of the likely presence of the 215 children, the Lisqueque, the missing, on the Tk'emlúps Indian residential schools just over a year ago. Since then, we've taken much responsibility to care for the unmarked graves. The Tk'emlúps, here we are conducting an investigation pursuant to our inherent jurisdiction to look at steps towards finding out how many children there are, who they were, who their people are, their families, the communities that they came from, how they died and came to be buried here, and how they should be cared for, and the justice that needs to be sought on behalf of them and their families. So we have heard and had many discussions with Minister Lametti, and very honored to be here because today Canada, has respected our input and dialogue and conversations and the jurisdiction that we have over at our lands, and that they're willing to provide whatever support they can to ensure that we can meet the obligations of the Lisqueque and their families. The mandate of the special interlocutor is going to confirm and confirms that respect. So many Indigenous communities across Canada are launching similar investigations, and it is very painstaking, and it is vitally important work, and work that is going to take time, and it's going to take resources. And this is one example of those resources that are going to assist our communities to do the work that it needs to. Canada has an essential role to play in ensuring that those resources are available and that all communities can find their lost children and comfort them and their families. The special locateur will, we hope, work with all communities to make this happen. This role will come with a wealth of experience that has to demonstrate a commitment to serving residential school survivors and their families and their communities. So we look forward to working with Canada, the special interlocutor, and our brothers and sisters from across Turtle Island as we work for the children and their relations to achieve some measure of comfort and justice for them. Kuksjam.
Merci beaucoup, Kimberly Casimir. Maintenant, je cède la parole au Chief Cadmus Delorme of the Cowessess First Nation.
Tanse, good morning to all, to my fellow chiefs, delegates, ministers, Thank you, Knowledge Keeper McGregor, for the rendered prayer. I come to you from Treaty 4 territory in southern Saskatchewan. First off, to Chief Casimir and to all the other communities that are listening, that are going through this process right now of validating unmarked graves. It is a journey that is very heavy on the heart, but very it sheds light at the end of the tunnel for children that truly never made it home. Cowessess First Nation, we have been doing our technical services, validating the unmarked graves. We've been doing the research with the end goal of putting names to unmarked graves. We have been talking and making sure survivors of residential school and families of survivors, that emotional and that mental side is being addressed. One of the challenges that Cowessess has faced is some survivors are asking for justice. Some survivors want to make sure that something is truly done about this. I have worked very well with Minister Miller, Minister Lametti, and many other ministers who have responded so quickly and professionally, and I thank them for that. But just like me as a chief, we got about 12 to 15 things constantly going. This position of special interlocutor is going to be focused on making sure that every door is open when it comes to research, when it comes to working with where research is, where the documents are, to working with the justice system to see if any justice can truly be served, so that survivors that are in pain and in frustration right now, that we can truly show them that we not only stand beside them, but we also want to make sure that justice will be served for the wrongs that have been done. There's two things that Cowessess has learned in the last year is for Indigenous people, the unmarked graves is validation. Validation of the pain, the frustration, the anger, the tiredness of just trying to remain Indigenous in a country which somewhat still oppresses. To my Canadian friends and family, the shield is down. Many are admitting, I need to know more about the truth. The unmarked graves has created a new approach that we all need to take in this country, to all reset our compass just a little bit for our children and children yet unborn. There are over 150 residential schools in this country. We have addressed less than 35 of them. We're on this journey for a while. I look forward to working with the special interlocutor, to working with Minister Lametti, Minister Miller, my fellow communities and First Nations addressing this. Together we'll get stronger, but this position is truly going to make sure that we have all opportunities to fulfill justice, to get names to unmarked graves, and to validate the technical side. And Cowessess First Nation looks forward to working with the special interlocutor, the Naskaman.
Merci beaucoup, Chief Cadmus Delorme. Maintenant, je vais céder la parole au ministre Lametti.
Kwekwe, Ulokut, Tansi, Sego, hello, bonjour. Thank you, Elder McGregor, for your words of wisdom and blessing this morning and getting us started in the right way. I too would like to begin by acknowledging that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, and thank you, Chief White Duck, for the welcome. I also want to acknowledge the significant presence of Indigenous leadership here in the room. President Obed of ITK, President Caron of the Métis National Council. Important to understand that we're not just talking about First Nations, but we're also talking about the residential school impact on Inuit and Métis peoples in Canada. Chief White Duck, Chief Bonspiel, thank you for your support. Chief Hill, thank you for your presence. thank you to Chief Delorme and to Cook Kashmir. I will thank you as well later in my remarks. And I want to pay particular tribute to Roberta Hill and John Elliott, both from Six Nations, both survivors. Thank you for being here. Finally, I want to thank my parliamentary colleagues who have joined us, as well as my team in my ministry, as well as the Justice Department. It is important for non-Indigenous peoples to understand what happened at residential schools, and the Justice Department, my deputy François Daigle is here, as well as Laurie Sargent, who are working hard on this file, and I want to thank everybody for helping us to move this. All of your presence here today is a testament to the significance of this announcement. The words you've heard from Minister Miller and Cook Kashmir and Chief Delorme are the context for why we are here today. They also explain in the clearest possible language why we need to act. So thank you in particular, Cookpee Rosanne and Chief Cadmus, for putting things so plainly. In particular, non-Indigenous Canadians need to hear this, and they need to hear it again and again. L'ampleur du travail que nous devons accomplir est un triste rappel. Le passé, tel qu'a été exposé à Tk'emlúps, à Cowessess et dans de nombreuses autres communautés, a laissé les traces douloureuses. Si nous souhaitons avancer sur la voie de la guérison et de la réconciliation, nous avons besoin d'outils juridiques adaptés à ces questions difficiles. Comment pouvons-nous soutenir les Premières Nations, les Inuits et les Métis dans leur deuil adéquatement et surtout respectueusement? Last August, we announced the federal government's intention to appoint a special interlocutor to work with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis governments, representative organizations, communities, survivors, and families, to make recommendations to how best address the legal questions associated with unmarked graves. It was an idea that came from First Nations leaderships in Tk'emlúps and British Columbia in particular. Today, I'm pleased to say that we've reached this important milestone. It's an honor and a privilege to announce the appointment of Kimberly Murray as independent special interlocutor for missing children and unmarked graves and burial sites associated with Indian residential schools. Kimberly is a member of the Kanehsatake Mohawk Nation. She's a lawyer. She's the first ever Assistant Attorney General for Indigenous Justice for the province of Ontario, which she served as for 6 years, from 2015 to 2021. Before that, she was the Executive Director of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. In her current work, she is the Executive Lead for the newly created Survivors Secretariat at the Six Nations of Grand River, working to recover the missing children and unmarked burials at the Mohawk Institute. Kimberly Murray is especially qualified to take on this role, and appointing her as special interlocutor is a critical step in advancing respectful commemoration, healing, and justice for Indigenous peoples in Canada. Neawant, Kimberly. Over the past year, as you've heard from Cook Kashmir and Chief Delorme, as well as others, we held extensive engagement with the communities directly affected and with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis leadership, and I thank all of those who participated in these discussions. Together, we co-developed a clear mandate for this role, and I want to thank everyone who contributed to this important work. Cook Kashmir, Chief Delorme, we're grateful for your guidance and partnership in this process. The national leadership, President Obed, President Caron, as well as President Rosanne and other First Nations leadership structures across Canada and communities. Thanks to all of you. The independent special interlocutor will be responsible for identifying measures and recommending a new legal federal framework to ensure the respectful and culturally appropriate treatment of unmarked graves and burial sites of children at former residential schools. This will be done in collaboration with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis governments, survivors, communities, representative organizations, and families. We're building trust. We have to rebuild trust every day. And every day we have to start over again, rebuilding trust. This appointment will help. Pour aider les communautés autochtones, nous devons d'abord mériter leur confiance. Il s'agit donc d'une part importante du rôle de l'interlocuteur spécial. Je crois fermement que rétablir la confiance brisée est essentiel au processus de guérison et un moyen d'honorer la mémoire des enfants qui ne sont jamais revenus de pensionnat. Madame Murray travaillera également avec d'autres ministres du gouvernement fédéral, les provinces et territoires, de même que d'autres institutions concernées, comme les églises et ceux qui détiennent des archives. L'interlocutrice spéciale indépendante devra examiner attentivement le cadre juridique qui s'applique actuellement à la protection des tombes et des sépultures anonymes, ce qui comprend les lois et des protocoles autochtones, ainsi que les lois, des règlements, des pratiques et des outils fédéraux et provinciaux. She will look at current legal frameworks for the investigation, protection, and preservation of these sites, Indigenous and non-Indigenous laws and protocols, and suggest ways of moving forward. It is important to note that in her new role, Kimberly Murray will be nonpartisan. She will work independently and impartially with full transparency. Her functional independence is crucial, and we are committed to respecting and protecting this important aspect of her work. Excuse me. The Government of Canada is fully committed to supporting this process. Budget 2022 proposed an investment of $10.4 million over 2 years to support the Special Interlocutor's work. This investment will ensure the full support for the Special Interlocutor and her team to get this important job done and done right. I look forward to seeing the work take shape with clear and steady progress throughout, because these families and communities have waited far too many years to find peace. The appointment is for 2 years. Kimberly Murray will produce 2 reports, an interim report after 1 year, and a final report. These reports will be delivered to me, to First Nations, Métis and Inuit survivors, communities, and families, describing progress and results. And these reports will also be available to the public. In order to reshape our foundations, to find true justice, Indigenous voices must never again be silenced. This appointment presents a renewed opportunity to work together on building a positive, healing future for Indigenous peoples in Canada. It's a critical step in our journey towards reconciliation. Congratulations, and thank you, Kimberly, for agreeing to take on this crucial role. I invite you to say a few words.
Short. So, Sego, Segwego, Skinagoa, Kimberly Murray, Yungyats, Ganye, Gahaga, Ni'i, Ne, Kanehsatake, Wakwaho. Bonjour tout le monde et merci Ministre Lametti et Minister Miller pour cette présentation. Good morning, everyone. First, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, and I recognize that Ottawa has been and continues to be the home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. I want to say miigwech to Elder McGregor for your opening words and your Thanksgiving address. Your important words bring our minds together as one for our shared purpose to honor those children that never made it home from Indian residential schools. To the survivors and elders who are here today and those who may be watching online, I appreciate everything that you have done to raise our collective awareness about the violence perpetrated against you, your families, and your communities. This burden of educating Canadians and the world and having to share what survivors Diane and Roberta Hill have called Canada's ugly truths should never have been your burden to share or to carry. I honor you, each of you, and I promise that I will do everything in my power to ensure that the Office of the Special Interlocutor is here to help and not do further harm in any way. I want to acknowledge all the ministers and members of Parliament and Indigenous leadership, including Kupi Casimir and Chief Delorme, National Chief Archibald, President Obed, and President Caron. I look forward to meeting with you, coming to your communities, and hearing from leadership and survivors about the challenges communities continue to face in their tireless efforts of recovery, repatriation, protection, and commemoration. I am ready to hear about the unique barriers your communities have had and continue to have while doing this sacred work. What colonial laws are standing in your way? Let us discuss how we might dismantle them together. I recognize that searching each site has its own unique challenges based on the province or territory you are in, the location of the lands that the Indian residential schools were on, the religious entity that was involved, and the number of years that each operated. We know that many solutions lie in our culture, in our languages, and with our own Indigenous laws. I hope we can work together to breathe life into these laws and into the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, so we can build a framework that will respectfully honor and protect the memories and spirits of the children. I want to take a moment to speak to Grand Chief Bonspiel from my community of Kanehsatake. Nawigowi, Grand Chief, Nawigoa, for your support and the support of the Council of Chiefs. I will ensure that I carry the strength of our ancestors that are laying at rest in the Pines and in the other cemeteries in our community. And I will also honor those children that were taken from our community to Indian residential schools around the country and honor those little ones as well. I trust and I know that the Council of Chiefs and you, Grand Chief, will let me know if I stray from our Indigenous teachings and gently guide me back on course. To the survivors of the Mohawk Institute, I had the great privilege of working with you over the last 11 months. I say Nawagoa, Nakagwego, Gunarunkwa. I love you. I'm here for you, and I will always be here for you, to assist you as you continue the ground search and document collection efforts and processes to recover the missing children at the Mush Hole. And I know Chief Hill, thank you for being here, and the elected council, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy Chiefs of Council, and the Mohawks of the Grand River will continue to be there for you and the community to help find every child that may be buried on the 600 acres of the lands associated with the Mohawk Institute, the longest operating Indian residential school in Canada. Ce n'était pas une décision facile que d'accepter ce rôle interlocutrice spécial, mais après avoir consulté des survivants et survivantes, des aînés, ma famille et les membres de la communauté, je me suis engagée à faire le travail avec humilité, respect, honnêteté et courage. It was not an easy decision to take this role as special interlocutor, but after consulting with survivors, elders, my family, and community members, I've committed to doing this work with humility, with respect, honesty, and courage. I want to say nawe to all those that put my name forward. I'm humbled that you've entrusted me with this important work to bring justice to Indigenous children and their families now and into the future. As Minister Lametti, maybe you didn't say this, and this is what my notes are saying, indicated my mandate will commence on June 14th. 13th, 14th, and will last for 2 years. Before beginning my work, I will take direction from elders and traditional people on what additional ceremonies I must participate in to prepare for this important responsibility. I will start with the Haudenosaunee teachings I have received on the condolence ceremony. This ceremony will remove the tears from my eyes so that I can see clearly. It will clear my ears so that I can prepare to hear properly. And it will remove the lumps in my throat so that I can communicate clearly. When the spirits of the children spoke to the world last summer from Tk'emlúps, Secwépemc, they brought to light what survivors and Indigenous communities have been saying for decades. Children died in Indian residential schools. Many were denied the opportunity to go home, physically and spiritually. Indigenous families and communities have a right to know and a need to know which children died, how they died, and where the children are buried. Survivors have said that they want justice, and having these answers to these questions is part of the justice that they seek. This is heart work, not hard, heart work. The spirits of these children did what the TRC commissioners, Justice Sinclair, Chief Wilton Littlechild, and Dr. Marie Wilson asked us all to do, and that's to move from our heads to our heart. Today, Prime Minister Trudeau, Minister Lametti, Minister Miller, and their cabinet colleagues have responded to the TRC's calls to action to support communities in finding the missing children and unmarked burials. I will build on this important work of the TRC, and I pledge to always think until I feel and feel until I think. As I move forward with my mandate, I invite all Canadians to join us on this path towards truth, healing, and justice. So thank you, merci, marci, nukurmuk, miigwech, hayai, nawe.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Murray. Maintenant, on va commencer la période de questions. We will now begin the question and answer session. As usual, we will go with one question and one follow-up. Le format est d'une question puis un suivi. Vous avez un micro derrière la salle. There will be a microphone at the back of the room. We will take questions from the room, and then we'll go to questions on the line. A reminder to please press *6 to raise your hand if you're dialing in. Please go ahead with the first question if you can state your name and your organization.
I'm Laura Osmond, the Canadian Press. My question's for Ms. Murray. I'm just wondering if you can speak in really practical terms to how your work is going to help communities like the ones in Manitoba who've discovered potential unmarked grave sites and those who may be on the precipice of finding potential sites. How is this work going to change this process for them?
So, thank you for your question. First, I would think it's really important for people to recognize that each site, because of where it's located in each of the provinces, will have different barriers and unique challenges when they're doing the work. When it comes to the search, what laws will be triggered when they find burials, who gets called in, who doesn't get called in, which Indigenous law will apply. Part of the mandate of the Special Interlocutor's Office is to try and weave our way through all the conflicting jurisdictional quagmire mess that exists right now and try and find a solution for moving forward. I think that communities like Kuki Casimir's and Chief Delorme's community and Chief Hill, who have started this work, are ahead, and they have those connections right now. And so really the most important part, I think, of the Special Interlocutor is to be there to help those communities that are just starting. They don't know how to start. They don't know where to begin. One of the most important things is to bring people together. to bring the communities together so they can learn from one another. You know, I can speak from experience of having worked at Six Nations of the Grand River with the Mohawk Institute survivors. I would say 1/3 of my job has been speaking with other communities, asking, what did you do here? How did you do this? What's this company like on GPR? Who do you go to look at analyze the results? So it's really a connector and connecting people and helping them with what they want to do. And everyone's going to have their own path forward. And I'm not here to tell them what that path is, just to clear the way for them.
Thank you so much. And to Cookie Casimir and Chief Delorme, maybe you could speak a little bit to what some of the most urgent issues are that you're hoping the special interlocutor can address so that communities who are discovering potential grave sites now may be able to move more quickly toward having some kind of closure and be able to move the process along more smoothly.
Chief Casimir, did you want to go first? I could go first while Chief Casimir is figuring out her mute. Thank you for the question. This is Chief Delorme on Cowessess First Nation. We have the Maribel Residential School Roman Catholic run from 1898 to 1972, where Indian Affairs then took it over, and we closed down in 1996. There's two approaches that our research and technical team have been doing. First off, there's three things we have to focus on when doing this. Number one is the emotional and mental support of survivors, of family of survivors, of the community. This is truly triggering in ways that has been tough for many. And so the interlocutor role to help Maribel Cowessess on the technical side, the radar penetrating system is pretty simple. It's scientific. The data collection. Right now we're having a little challenge in who owns that data because we don't have the software to own it. You know, the radar penetrating system is on 4 wheels, most likely ours was, and it picks up 7 feet under of undisturbed soil, and then the data. So the technical side, Cowessess is in good hands. We have a good partnership, but I'm very cautious of how some nations and who's owning that data. Secondly, on the research side, we have to go into, in our case, Roman Catholic records, and the Roman Catholic Church has been pretty open with us. We're actually one of the first in there, so they are kind of just standing on standby and saying, here they are. And so we have now working with another records with the sisters or the nuns. And so we just need to make sure the interlocutor will open doors for us when doors are not being opened. But right now, to date, we look forward to working with the interlocutor, briefing her on where we're at. But the technical and the research side is really needed for this position.
Excellent. Thank you. I could get my mouse over to the screen. So first of all, I just wanted to say congratulations to Kimberly Murray for accepting the position, and do look forward to working with you. For us here at the Tk'emlúps, it's so important to know that, you know, there's a lot of work that needs to get done, a lot of steps that need to be taken when we're looking at, you know, the forensic work that needs to be done as well, and while seeking justice. And, you know, for the families and respect for them and their survivors and families of the communities that have been impacted. And it's also about meeting our obligations to our Secwépemc laws that we currently have in place, you know, legally and spiritually. That is at the foremost and at the forefront. You know, I know as we, you know, work on these next steps to identify those in the unmarked graves and collect information regarding the operation of the school, it'll be so important for all those legal processes and normative considerations to be understood. And that's from us as First Nations, but also non-First Nations. And, you know, we believe and looking forward to the special interlocutor and to be able to engage with us and advising the federal government on the proper frameworks and approaches and the steps that need to be taken to guide us and to support us as we move forward with our own communities, but also for all of us as well. And so, Kukshan.
Question en français à Laurence, puis après on va à Fraser à l'autre micro. Vas-y, Laurence.
Oui, bonjour. Laurence Martin, Radio-Canada. Ma question est soit pour le ministre Miller ou Lametti. En termes concrets, juste pour que les gens comprennent vraiment bien ce rôle d'interlocuteur, qu'est-ce que ça va changer concrètement dans tout ce processus-là? Je ne sais pas si vous pouvez nous donner un ou deux exemples concrets.
Merci pour la question, Laurence. C'est avant tout, il faut souligner avant tout que le mandat a été élaboré en collaboration avec les communautés, les Premières Nations, les Inuits, les Métis, le leadership. Et donc, on a vraiment réagi en tant que ministre fédéral aux suggestions et aux besoins, si on veut, des communautés affectées. C'est une personne qui va être un intermédiaire, qui va ouvrir les portes. On a dans certains cas, certaines institutions ont des difficultés ou des réticences à donner accès aux documents. Elle va évidemment soutenir les familles, les communautés, travailler avec les survivants, justement pour identifier leurs besoins et donc aider les communautés, le leadership d'une communauté de combler les besoins des survivants et aussi de nous aider en tant que gouvernement fédéral, et elle va travailler avec les provinces et les territoires aussi, comment on peut mieux appuyer. Et finalement, elle va identifier les lacunes dans l'encadrement juridique pour nous donner des suggestions comment protéger les lieux, comment promulguer des lois qui respectent les lieux, mais aussi s'il y a des lacunes dans le processus d'enquête ou la responsabilité, si on veut, comment est-ce que on peut réagir en tant que gouvernement fédéral avec des nouvelles lois. Donc, elle a un rôle assez important, je dois dire, assez important pour identifier les lacunes et pour travailler avec tout le monde pour faciliter les pistes, les solutions.
Madame Murray doit remettre son rapport intérimaire dans 1 an, son rapport final dans 2 ans. Est-ce que vous vous engagez à mettre en œuvre toutes ces recommandations?
On va travailler avec elle. Donc, elle est indépendante. Elle a le...
Recommandations.
C'est difficile à dire oui ou non avant de les voir. Mais on va... Jusqu'ici, on a démontré la bonne foi pour ce rôle et on va continuer. On va laisser à Mme Murray l'indépendance de dire ce qu'elle faut dire, de faire ce qu'elle faut faire. Et puis, on va travailler avec elle et les communautés, évidemment affectées, le leadership présent dans la pièce, pour trouver des solutions durables.
Merci.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Fraser.
First Nation, APTN National News. I guess for a lot of people, seeking justice or pursuing justice ultimately requires holding somebody responsible for actions. And so I guess in this case, as you amass more information, get more records, is there any chance that any of this will lead to criminal prosecution? Or for the ministers, I guess, but if you want to answer.
Thank you, Fraser, for the question. Look, I will be honest and say that the accountability and the lack of prosecutions is something that survivors, that Indigenous communities, that Indigenous leadership have pointed out time and time again, and with reason, and it is something that we need to correct. As in my role as Attorney General at the federal level, I can't appoint a special prosecutor. As you know, prosecutions are done by the independent prosecution services at the provincial and federal level, and investigations are done by police of jurisdiction. One of the questions that Kimberly is going to get is, can we better that system? Is there a way moving forward that we might be able to envisage a different kind of system? And I'm certainly open to those suggestions, and as a government, we're open to those suggestions. We need to do justice. We know that. We need to be accountable. We know that. We're taking steps to do that, and I would say we're building trust. Let's let the process unfold and see where it goes.
Just briefly, and the overarching point here is that Canada shouldn't be investigating itself. And this isn't really an interim step on a long process to accountability. Kim Murray is a lot of things, and you'll see it, you've seen it in her CV. One thing that isn't in there, but it probably sticks out the most, is she's no pushover. She's already corrected David Lametti on what he said, so I think you can expect more of that and probably more of what I tend to say. But the reality in this is having someone who is independent, that can work with communities, that has the proven track record to come to the Government of Canada and coordinate with all the different departments that are responsible for supporting communities in their quest for truth, is an important but interim step in what will be as Cadmus Casimir said, a very long process of accountability. There have been people in the past that have been prosecuted. There are people still free today that have committed horrific crimes. This is the next step in the process of accountability, but first and foremost, a continued search for truth, guidance, support in very difficult decisions for communities, one in and around the exhuming of bodies, which is obviously very painful and very triggering. Canada can't decide to go in itself without consulting, without doing this in a respectful way. And Kim Murray will fill a very important gap in making sure that we're not only doing things in a concerted fashion at the federal level and supporting in the best way, but also liaising with communities and building a level of trust that wouldn't be afforded to us, frankly.
If I may add to the minister's comments, early days, first day, day one, I expect when I go to communities and meet with survivors and leadership that I will hear about these conversations, about how they've struggled with what to do, how to have prosecution, how do we invite the police in, what police, RCMP, provincial police, municipal police, First Nations police. And there are pros and cons to all of those that I've heard talking to survivors in the last year. And so I'm looking forward to speaking to each of them, hearing about the different ideas that they have about what they can do on this road to justice, what that would look like. And it's going to look different, I think, in every location and every province. And we'll have to, pull this all together and see what kind of recommendations we can make, directed not just to the federal government, but to the provincial and territorial governments, and see what changes might be necessary in those jurisdictions for justice to truly happen. So early days, I expect this will be #1 conversation for many communities.
And I guess my follow-up question is for the two First Nations leaders that are here as well. Just along those lines, you mentioned protection of, or Chief Delorme mentioned protection of records are protected properly. Obviously, validation was a big issue for a lot of communities because these stories have been revolving around for some period of time. But beyond the honoring of children, many things have to happen. But what sort of feedback are you getting back from your community members of anything they'd like to see beyond that, and in terms of people being held responsible, reparations, criminal prosecution, or what are you both hearing in terms of that?
Chief Casimir, you or me first? I'll go? Okay. Thank you for the question. I'm going to speak open, please, and I know there's a helpline, and I just want to really talk truth here for a minute, because this is a very uncomfortable conversation to have for many First Nations people. When it comes to the Maribel unmarked graves, it has really put a challenge in the unity of our community Some are Roman Catholic faithgoers in my community. Some want justice now. They want someone in jail right now, today, for the pain and anger that is truly there. And it has been truly triggering. And so this position will make sure that Cowessess, if there is any criminal activity, we are treating our site like a criminal site. Like we're making sure every one of our technical teams gathers every evidence. We can't go to the local RCMP because what are we actually going to show them? In Saskatchewan, we got the Cemetery Act of Saskatchewan, a provincial law. And so this interlocutor position role, when working with Maribel, that we will make sure that if there is any criminal activity, that we can explain and we can get feedback and we can explain and get feedback. Ultimately, our end goal is to put names to unmarked graves. That is our end goal. The research side of things, when going into these research, you're going in looking for names, you're coming out with validation stories. And it is going to be truly tough for survivors in the coming months and years when each gravesite area, each unmarked gravesite area has to do this. Our technical team needs a lot of mental and emotional support because of what they have to go through. And, you know, lastly, I'm truly excited for this position because we are challenged at times. Minister Lametti, Minister Miller respond to our questions, to our calls. But at the end of the day, this position is going to be someone that will help us bring forward truth and give clarity to any legalities of what we're doing.
So for us at the Cowessess Secwépemc, you know, for us, it's about finding the truth before we can determine, you know, what kind of justice needs to be pursued. And it's also about preserving the evidence to ensure that, you know, rigor in our investigation to ensure that if we find that crimes were committed, the evidence is there to pursue those criminal prosecutions. But it's also about, you know, when we look at Cowessess in residential school, it's not only impacted the Cowessess Secwépemc, but it has been far wide in that many students came from all over British Columbia and into the US and the Yukon and into, you know, Alberta as well. So there's many First Nation communities that have been impacted by this one residential school right here on our ancestral lands here. So it's also about the protocols that they have from their communities as well, and those collaborative efforts and communication that needs to take place to truly honor and respect, you know, what next steps will take place for them as well.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Matt.
Hi there, Mackenzie Gray with CTV News. My questions are for the ministers. Each one of you can answer if you'd like. Last week, Nick Nanos from Nanos Research did a poll for CTV saying that 62% of Canadians support the idea of the Queen apologizing for the Crown's role in residential schools. Do you agree with the majority of Canadians that the Queen needs to apologize for the Crown's role in this?
Look, I think, you know, it perhaps isn't even appropriate to juxtapose what has been asked by the Truth and Reconciliation from the Catholic Church and the Pope to apologize. The clear result of conclusions of a lot of work done by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and a clear-cut call to action. To one that I haven't seen your poll, Mackenzie, I'm not in a position to question it either, but I think the reality is one that it is somewhat different, and I don't say that out of disrespect. We live in a country where the responsible government is vested in the ministers of the Crown, who have a role of, and in my role, the Minister of Crown-Indigenous Relations, of a fiduciary one towards Indigenous peoples. The issue of the Queen apologizing isn't necessarily a new one. It's gotten a lot more coverage recently with the visit of Prince Charles. but it is one that is nuanced in its approach. There are many communities, look, frankly, and it's no different in non-Indigenous society. There are many people who would find this a profound and deep thing for this to happen. You have to acknowledge that in some Indigenous communities there is a deep and profound, at times personal connection with the Crown. And that is one I think we have to reflect in our answers and our recommendations that we make and in interactions that we do have with the Queen. There are others that just don't give a darn. They want justice in another form, truth, accountability in another form, and there's perhaps people that fall in between. To the extent that you look at it from the lens that as a country we're starting to look at more, which is one of healing, of survivors that might find solace in an apology that is proffered from the head of state, the Queen. That's something that I think we have to look at when we formulate our recommendations as a Privy Council and put forward to the Queen. Now, it isn't something that we formed a definite view on. It's something that we have to consider looking at and understanding the perspectives foremost of Indigenous communities, reflecting that profound relationship at times that some Indigenous communities have with the Crown. But we have to realize that in a country like Canada, all effective power is vested in government and held to account by Parliament. So while this is and would be very much a symbolic act, we do acknowledge that it could have a profound act of healing for those survivors that are still waiting from that for that apology, as well as the capacity that the Queen plays as head of, whether symbolic or not, of the Anglican Church that did offer an apology. So that's another nuance that we have to reflect in our reflection and as we form a definite view on the matter. I think given the summer that's coming up and the high expectations there are on the Pope apologizing on Canadian soil in a meaningful and profound way, that will be the focus of the government in the next months. Thank you.
Anything to add, Minister Lametti?
Not much, Mackenzie. Just as a minister who works on a significant number of reconciliation files, and legal files, you become quickly, acutely aware of the honor of the Crown and your role in maintaining that. So I believe in my role as a minister, it's much more important for me to worry about honoring my engagements in order to bring honor to the Crown, and I will support what Minister Miller said with respect to how the importance that it might have, but it's tricky, of an apology from the Queen.
To Chief Delorme and Cadmus Casimir, in a similar vein, do you think true reconciliation is possible without an apology from the Crown?
Casimir, you want me to go first? I can, thank you. I'm going to be very respectable on my answer. I am not a residential school survivor. My parents went to residential schools. I'm a spokesperson for Cowessess First Nation. When it comes to apologies, I do empower residential school survivors to share and how it is helping their healing. I could share one thing. My father, I was with him when then Prime Minister apologized in 2008. And from that day forward, my father, who was a survivor, did change a little bit. He did start to talk a little bit more about his experience. So just from a personal perspective, I watched my father have an impact on someone's apology, but I'll leave my comments there.
Okay, so for myself, a couple of comments that I could make is one, I am a little bit disappointed that the Royals did not, include British Columbia as one of their stopping points as well. But I also want to acknowledge that for those who got to participate in the historical visit, this year commemorates 70 years of the Queen's service, the honors for her contributions and dedication to Canada, and meeting, many Canadians as well over her tenure. And, to me, steps with the Crown is important, because of the role of the Crown, that the relationship, that relationship too must nurture a step towards a better future, for all our generations and our children. In saying that, I know that I would be honored to meet with Her Majesty Elizabeth Queen II and have meaningful dialogue on the importance of change, but also on the renouncement of the doctrines of discovery and other moral superiority and colonial attitudes that still exist today, and to request the ear and support towards meaningful reconciliation.
All right, good morning. Jeff Peltier here with New Natsiak News. My question is for Minister Lametti. And about a year ago, Nunavut MP, the former MP, Mumilat Kakak, was calling for a special prosecutor. And I'm curious if that is still on the table at all, or if it might come out as a recommendation at the end of the 2-year report.
Thank you for the question. As I said to my colleague at the time, I don't actually currently have the power to create a special prosecutor under the powers that I have under federal law. We have hived off the investigative function to the police of jurisdiction. We've hived off the prosecutorial function to mainly provincial prosecutors and to some extent some federal prosecutors, and that's true in the territories as well. And then we will see if there is a suggestion that comes forth that could be enshrined in legislation that gives myself or some other person, if I'm no longer here, that power to do that, then we'll assess that at the time. But I don't want to prejudge Ms. Murray's work. Her work is independent. She's going to hear from communities. She's going to speak with various levels of government, Indigenous and non-Indigenous government, and hopefully we'll get a good set of recommendations moving forward.
And as a follow-up, this one, I guess it's mainly for Minister Miller, but about 2 weeks ago, Eric de Jager, a Catholic priest who was convicted of abusing many children, many Inuit children in Nunavut, was released from prison after only serving 2/3 of his sentence. What's your reaction to his parole, and what's your message to survivors in the communities who are affected by him?
You want my view on it? I think people like that should rot in jail, and it's especially for the crimes they committed. In a democracy such as ours, it's actually a good thing that people like me don't decide over people's life and death. And the reality of the judicial system is that people have and are afforded this opportunity for parole. And if they meet the conditions to an independent board, they are released under the conditions of liberation, which I understand in this case are so strict. But I can't imagine what people that went through this are going through. It must be devastating. I don't believe this person necessarily paid enough time in jail for his crimes, but again, that's not a decision that's made by people like me. It's probably a good thing, but I'm frustrated. I mean, it's a frustrating thing. It's a frustrating thing for all Canadians to see that, and particularly those that suffered harm at his hands and probably can continue to be triggered and traumatized, and as well as the children of the people that he's traumatized. So you have to trust in the system that is one of the best in the world, but hearing these things is deeply troubling, and my heart goes out to the survivors and those that this person hurt.
Let me just add, because it actually falls between us in the sense that the the parole system falls under the Minister of Public Safety, who's not with us today. I would echo Mr. Miller's comments that I do think our justice system is the best justice system in the world, but my heart does go out to the families, the victims of this perpetrator. I would hope, and I believe in our parole system. I believe in the manner in which these kinds of cases are administered. And I would hope that those people deciding that case took into account the real harm that was suffered by the victims and survivors of this person before according that parole. But I am one of the people that is the face of that system of justice in Canada, and I truly believe it is one of the best systems in the world, notwithstanding an outcome like this that I know is going to hurt people.
Thank you very much. We are now moving to questions on the phone. Un petit rappel de peser étoile 6 pour demander votre question. Please press star 6 to answer your question. Please go ahead. I see you're unmuted. We'll just wait 2 seconds to see if maybe you're trying to speak. No?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, hi there. This is Olivia Stepanovich from CDC. Thank you for taking our questions today, and congratulations, Ms. Murray, on your appointment. Ms. Murray, I'm wondering if you can address the concerns that some people have, some people who are out there who question the findings of unmarked graves and who even dismiss them. How do you respond to them, and will you be keeping national data on search results and findings as part of your work?
Thank you, Olivia, for the question and for your kind words to me. 2 things I would say about that question. One, I would just go back to Chief Delorme and the comments he made about the importance of data sovereignty. We are hearing from survivors and communities and leadership the importance of Indigenous data sovereignty. And I expect that will be something that we will explore through the Office of the Special Interlocutor and what kind of recommendations we can make in relation to that. The importance of controlling the data, analyzing the data with our own special expertise, and then the question of addressing the deniers. I will put lots of thought to this and hear from communities and see what different leaders and communities are saying and survivors, but I will say this. I worked at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I heard survivors who had to dig those burials to put the children in the ground. I have seen photographs of funerals of children at Indian residential schools. And I invite you to just go to the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation and listen to the testimony, read the testimony, and look at the photographs that are public. There are children buried on the grounds of Indian residential school. And we need to find them, and we need to know who they are. Thank you.
Olivia, if you have a follow-up, you can unmute yourself again. If not, we'll go to the next question. Reminders, it's star 6, étoile 6 pour la prochaine question. Okay, doesn't look like we have any more questions from the phone. So this is unfortunately all the time we have. Elder McGregor will officially close the event, but he just stepped away for 1 second. So I'd like to remind everyone that Sasha Gordon, a counselor from the Wabano Center. Oh, do you have a question?
I did, yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
Kimberly, I wonder what you would say to, sorry, this is Marcia McLeod from the Globe and Mail, to some in media, both here in Canada and the United States, who have been, bringing up certain narratives that question that children did die at residential schools, and have been questioning, creating the idea that there's some falsehood to the fact that thousands of children did die. And I'm curious what you would say to those who have been involved in sharing that kind of narrative.
Well, first and foremost, I would say what the Truth and Reconciliation Commissioner said. Everybody needs to read the report that was issued. And you need to listen to the survivors' testimony. And more importantly, you need to sit with the survivors, because as I said in my opening comments, this is heart work. We need to move from our head to our hearts. If you sit in a room with someone that told you when they were 10 years old, and I'm sorry, this may be hard for some of the survivors to hear, but if you sit in a room and talk to a survivor who had to dig those graves, you can feel it from them that they are speaking truth. Toske. Truth. I invite you to speak to the survivors.
Follow-up?
Thank you. No follow-up. Thank you.
Olivia, I see you unmuted yourself again. Did you have a follow-up?
Yes, I do. Thank you. I was trying to get in earlier, but I was having some technical difficulties. Ms. Murray, I'm just wondering how you might be working with the United Nations, because it's appointed a committee on unmarked graves. So I'm wondering how you might cooperate or collaborate with the UN. And for Chief Delorme and Kimberly Casimir, I'm wondering if you think there should be a separate UN investigation in addition to this.
Kimberly Casimir, did you want to go first?
I'll go next.
Does that mean me first? So I think it's clear in the mandate of the special interlocutor that I'm not to interfere in any other processes that might be triggered provincially, federally, internationally. But clearly, the Office of the Special Interlocutor wants to work with all other organizations, investigations, entities that may be triggered. I welcome United Nations involvement. If the Special Rapporteur, when the Special Rapporteur is coming to Canada, I would be open and very much like to meet with the Special Rapporteur to talk about UN responses around the missing children and unmarked burials. Kupi?
Thank you. No, thank you for that. I had to collect my thoughts. I know that I had the opportunity to meet with the UN interlocutor and Francesco, and we had some really good discussion, because here in Canada there is no roadmap, and there are examples internationally that have lessons learned, steps and that they have gone through with different scenarios. And I know that for us, we're not there yet on what those parameters could look like. And I know that working with Kimberly in the new appointed position as a locutor, this is also going to be about, supporting not only our community, but all First Nations who've been impacted by residential schools, within their communities. And then it is also, this is also about, the international law as well, our Indigenous laws, and also Canadian laws. That's why all the different relationships and the collaboration and the co-collaboration to be able to move forward. The UN, does have a role to play. We know that, in moving these investigations forward and also bringing it to light. These are terrible, terrible histories. And, these are also consequences of colonialism. So moving forward, it's going to be a long road ahead of us, but it's going to be taking those collaborative efforts.
Thank you very much. That wraps up the question portion. As I was saying, a reminder that Sasha Gordon, a counselor from the Wabano Center for Aboriginal Health, is available to support residential school survivors who are present today and any of the people who are joining us today in the room. It will be in the Saint Laurent room downstairs. Justice officials can accompany you if needed. The justice officials are at the door. Elder McGregor, could I ask you to return to the podium to officially close the event? Thank you very much.
It's been a very interesting press conference, and it's also what I see as the second round. We've had the first round with the TRC, and it brings up a lot of questions. But it is good that we're here, and there's one word that's thrown around loosely, and it's called reconciliation. I think this second round is going to be much deeper and give it some meaning. And when I look at the sign over here, it says building trust and seeking justice. I think with some of the apologies that have occurred and the discussions with the Crown and the Church, I think for the apologies that have been made, I think there is one, there should be on the sign over there, rebuilding that trust and re-examining that. And I think that's what our residential school children, survivors, and the burials is going to be looking at in terms of that. This is what our children will teach us for those that cannot speak, and the seeking justice. And this is one of the things that's going to be a real challenge, because I remember the commissioners and Murray Sinclair. In order for him to listen and to hear all of that, it was quite a challenging, and in order to survive that spiritually, mentally, physically, and emotionally, he had to go back to his teachings. And this is the most difficult challenge. What I understand today of this press conference for all the ministers and all the people gathered here, and especially introducing Kimberly as the new interlocutor, she is going in to that realm of examining as to what happens and for the what happened to the children and for the burials. This is very serious. I've been asked to close this, but what I am going to do is a little different. You may or may not want to participate, but I would like to get a circle of all of our individuals here, ministers, and the ones here are chiefs. I would like to form a little circle. The reason I'm going to tell you is this. It's important because we have an interlocutor, and she's also female. And she's going into serious waters. Again, to hear some of these stories now, we heard the stories of the residential school survivors, but the residential school survivors speak on behalf of the burials. There's a word that she used as well as in Mohawk and all First Nations. There's that word, Teibwewin. And that's the truth. In order to be able to do reconciliation, you have to have that truth. As ugly as it is, and as bad as it is, everyone has to hear that. We have to hear what happened here in Canada. But also, Canada sets an example as well. When we look south of the border, they just did their report. And they're looking at how this process of what's happening here in Canada. This is our second round. So I would like all of the ministers and our residential school survivors to come out in front and form a circle, and I will do the final acknowledgement. Because this is something that we have to do together. We have to talk to each other, and if we don't talk to each other, then we give none for our children.
Residential school. Kan ko aga no di shak. Ina bis ke dawi do ko go ma club ma zije kani gan zije Anishinaabe do sich kan Anishinaabe sig. Ken da na wa pitch. Kai do je on je abno di shna ne kai ni wa wa na in a residential school. Aya kani gan zi chong ma quick as in college Kimberly. Dawi go kwa chimishkawitich. Can we put you on what I'm saying? It's be about my iji in Mekanaki. Ogano, Dan Kayen, the Wache of no G-Shuck. The way it looks Chimigwetch, and the words are, is thank you for today and for all that is provided. But give everyone here the strength that we've gotten together to do this meeting. Well, Anishinaabe like, and especially the person here that has the responsibility of Kimberly. She will hear the stories, give her the strength, and also give her the strength to support and the survivors and the parents to be able to do that, to be able to tell her that she not falter when she hears this. Stories, but that they can hear the voices of the buried. It's very important for everyone here that we have to communicate and tell this Debwe and the truth. So with this, I say miigwech, 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 miigwech. Miigwech.